Hello, I'm Teresa Smith. I wanted to welcome you all here. I had a few moments of time. Thought I'd come on here and share my story with my speaking voice. I've previously written, I've also done a podcast that is probably a more shorter version of what I'll share today. And it was audio only, and you get a different feel when you can look and see the person that's talking as they're sharing the story. I also wanted to share to a bigger audience, a wider audience than just in the blogging world. Not many people have as much time to read anymore. I hardly have time to read or write anymore. And audio is usually just a better way of communicating. And I wanted to come on here today, share my story, hopefully encourage others, motivate others to share your own story, to find healing. If there's something going on in your relationship that isn't right, I would say trust your gut, follow your gut, try to figure out what's not right, and listen to that. I think our intuition is one of our greatest gifts, and oftentimes we're told to just squelch that and that we don't know and we can't trust those, but I do believe they're from God. And I also want to share my story as part of my own healing and moving forward. I am far removed from that situation, although it's had lasting effects on my life, and I am still working through some of the problems. I do want to write a book on it. I also would like to help other women share their stories or find help. I don't have all the answers, of course, nobody does, but if you're needing help, if you're just wanting someone to talk to, I'm a very good listener. Maybe not the best speaker, but I am a good listener. And I'm just really passionate about this topic, as you will see. It is a somewhat sensitive topic, and I don't want to get censored, so I will be using the least offensive terms when discussing problems, issues. So, I guess I'll start with when I got married first time around. Was in 2011, and I met my now ex-husband through Christchurch, Spokane, Washington. If you are familiar with the Sons of Patriarchy podcast, they talk about Doug Wilson's church, the CREC out of Moscow, and the CREC Spokane was an offshoot of that. It's an excellent podcast to listen to. I would highly recommend it. You can understand some of the spiritual trauma and incorrect theology that I was believing at the time of my first marriage. And that's an excellent resource. But I met my ex-husband in Spokane, Washington actually met at a New Year's party in 2010, so right into the year 2011. And we ended up getting married that October of 2011, which was a very long courtship for that whole scene. Even though to most normal folks, that is a very short relationship, dating to engaged to married. But I went into that with my own views of who I thought the family was. I I really liked his family. There was 17 brothers and sisters, which seems kind of outrageous now, but at the time I was looking for a community. I was told I would never be able to have children when I was 17 due to polycystic ovarian syndrome and my Hashimoto's. They said it would be almost impossible for me to have a child. So, much to my surprise, in November of 2011, I found out I was expecting my first child. I was very excited, very overwhelmed as well, because I went into the marriage thinking I wouldn't have kids for quite some time. And it was sort of a shock that that was actually happening. Good shock. And being a mother changed so much about me and helped me to have more respect for myself just on a human level, and to get over that self-esteem, and to stop the disordered eating, because I didn't want my child to see that and to take that on for themselves. And I am very thankful to have. So during our first month of marriage, I found pornography on his phone with zero attempt to have it hidden, or maybe he just forgot because he was on there all the time, and it just showed up immediately when I opened the phone. And I was not happy. I was newly married. I already had my own self-esteem issues. I had heard from his father that his boys didn't do any of that sort of thing. They were, good boys, and they would never, and they didn't ever look at none of that porn or anything. And back then, I used to take people at their word and believe them when they told me something. And I was very upset when I found that. I went into the room and kind of hold myself up for a few hours because I didn't know how to confront that or how to even talk about it. I typically shut down and don't talk when I'm very angry or upset, and I have to process for myself before I can even make sense of what's going on. And I remember later in the evening coming out and just talking with him, and he was crying, sobbing, somewhat hysterical, upset. He didn't know what was wrong with him, and just on his knees begging forgiveness. And I remember thinking that the reaction was a little bit strong, even though I don't like porn. I don't agree with porn. I think it's cheating just on its own. I thought it seemed over the top, but I also was newly married, newly pregnant. I don't think I even knew what I would do, or what I should have done was maybe get some space. I didn't realize what a big problem it was. I didn't realize it was just the tip of the iceberg, and I wanted to move on with my life and not see any problems. And I decided to forgive him and not go any further with it. And I don't think we even really brought it up anymore after that. So, fast forward, because not a lot to talk about in the middle years. I ended up with 3 daughters within 3 years. I had 3 under 3. My third daughter was born 10 days before my oldest turned 3. They were NICU babies. So long NICU stays. My kids were with family more than they were with me. They were with aunts and uncles, grandma and grandpa, my mom and dad, their other papa and grandma. And I I was very overwhelmed, barely keeping my head above water. At the time, I thought I was doing pretty good, but looking back, I was just swamped. And I didn't realize what was missing in my marriage. We didn't have real communication or any kind of real relationship. Now that I've had a real relationship and know what a good communication is, or at least better, no relationship is perfect, but man, I didn't realize how messed up it was on many levels. And so we ended up, let's see, that would have been, I believe, 2016. We sold our first little house. It was in Old Town, Idaho. And we moved into a fifth wheel RV. Drove it out to his parents, the Dollins, out in Newport, Washington. And we ended up living there for about 9 months while we looked for some property, because 3 girls, I didn't want them growing up in town. And we ended up finding a beautiful, beautiful 25 acres in Newport of just lush green grass, beautiful mountains around, teeny tiny little home, about 800 square feet, but it had 2 bedrooms and giant barn, which I think the barn sold me more than the house, because I've always wanted just too many animals. And fell in love with the property right away. We ended up moving like September, October of 2016. And then in 2017, I ended up pregnant again. And at 19 weeks, I lost our baby boy. And that was very traumatic for all of us. And that kind of spiraled me, but also woke me up, kind of shook my foundation, my reality, my thinking nothing bad would ever happen to me or my family, because if nothing so traumatic has ever happened, you feel safe, you feel invincible, and that was definitely stripped away. And the family was very supportive at that time. I had my sister-in-laws come over and milk my cow, bring us dinner. They were there how I always wanted a family and a community and a support system in your village. And it wasn't until that I really felt like I was finally part of this giant family, that I belonged, and that was very short-lived. So trying to get the timeline, in early 2018, one of the sisters, I will keep their names out of it, but I will speak of the brothers, with 17 kids. It's convoluted enough that they have some privacy. But one sister sent a group text to the family saying that her oldest brother had essayed her as a child. She had gone to the police, filed a report. She didn't want anybody to tell him that she had done this, which, in a family that large, if you don't want it to be talked about, you should just wait until whatever has happened with the police. But the mom, Christy Dolan, contacted the brother, Matt Dolan, and said that this sister had contacted the police and they would be coming over to pay him a visit. And so he was prepared, and the sheriff came out, and he told the sheriff that he would be right down to the station if he had questions he wanted to talk about. And so the sheriff went back to the police station, and then the brother Matt never showed up. And the deputy called him on his phone, and he said, if you want to talk to me, talk to my lawyer, here's his number, goodbye. That was the end of that. And I remember just being completely confused, because I thought this family was a great Christian family. I mean, they're a little rough around the edges, country folk. That part didn't bother me at all. Makes you seem a little more real and down to earth, I think. And I was just completely blindsided. Part of me didn't believe that it was possible, and yet it started to kind of click and make sense. Like, why did the sisters hang out in a room away from the brothers? The boys were always together, and the men, in one room. And it was just kind of awkward when everyone was together. And so I didn't know how to react. I think I should have reacted differently with what I know now, which is another reason to do this video, is because, I can look back and see how even at the first red flag, I should have done some drastic things. But things do happen for a reason, and I'm thankful for how it turned out overall, truly. So that was, I think, May or June when she contacted everybody. And my ex-husband, Luke Dolan, was very distraught. I mean, sick, probably sick to his stomach, I would say. Which, to me, if you heard your brother had essayed your sister, you would maybe have a similar reaction. It didn't seem out of character, out of line, or any red flags necessarily with how he reacted. And it was about a week after that, we were coming home. I believe it was from one of the many Saturday night dinners that we had at his mom and dad's house. Basically every Saturday was at the main mom and dad Dolan home. And all the married families would come over, and I mean, there was upwards of 50 people on a Saturday night. And we were driving back, got into the driveway. Our kids were walking at that point, all of them, I believe, and they kind of scurried out of our minivan. And he said something that he wanted to talk to me, so I hung around, and he said he wanted to confess something that happened with a different sister. So I'm just kind of got the feeling like when you're underwater and the world is just unfamiliar. And I was asking what happened. He was already crying at this point, and I was having a hard time getting a really clear answer. And he said, I think she was just a couple years younger, which I know it sounds kind of silly not to have done anything, or I guess confirm the numbers, not done anything, but when there's 17 kids, I mean, it took me probably a year to get everyone's names straight, and I should have followed up. But anyways, he was saying, it was only this, it was only that, it was only a little bit of inappropriate touching. It was nothing, nothing too extreme, I guess. Even now, what I know that what he did, if that was it, was very criminal, even if she was only 4 years younger, which was a lie. And he said, he thought she was just a couple years younger and it was just inappropriate touching. And I asked, well, how did it end? And his response, which is a red flag, is how he flipped the blame onto her, which is so unfair and disgusting of a thing to do. Said, she came up and tried to perform a certain act on him. And in that moment, he realized it was wrong, and he told her no, and it never happened again. And he thinks he was about maybe 15 when this happened. And he lived at home till he was about 22, 23. So I was like, wow, he made, 7 years. Nothing else happened. I mean, I was still sick. I was upset. I was sick to my stomach. I was contemplating leaving at that point. I was on the verge. I should have followed through. I should have asked more questions. I should have gone to the victim and not just listened to my ex-husband. But like I said, things play out how they do for a reason. So I ended up calling my dad, and I was crying, which is somewhat out of character for me. I told him what I knew, and my dad kind of talked me off a ledge, told me, well, he's been a good guy, as far as we knew at that point. Your whole marriage, it was a long time ago. He was able to end it. Supposedly he had asked for forgiveness from her, and she had granted that. And I was not okay with it, but it did seem a little bit premature to leave an entire marriage for something that happened when he was a pre-adolescent. Definitely some huge warning flags, and I was still processing all of that when I would like to say it was probably a month later. I had gone to the gym because that was my therapy, especially after I lost our baby. Come home, he was making dinner, which was very nice. And I walk in the door, and he says, "There's something I need to tell you." And I just kind of felt my stomach sink. It's like all the strength kind of left my body. And I'm just like, okay. I didn't even know what to expect at that point. And went into our room, so I was away from the girls. And he told me that he needed to confess something to me. And he told me that he had gone to see that he had gone to an Asian massage parlor and allowed them to touch him inappropriately. And that's how he worded it. And he kept on talking. He was saying things how he wanted to be honest with me so we could have a better relationship, and a few other things, but my brain was stopped at inappropriate touching. I'm like, wait a second. So you went to a massage parlor and then all of a sudden they started touching you? Probably not. This is a illegal business. Most of these women are not there of their own free will. And he was soliciting them, knew where to go, he knew what to ask for. I don't know how to get to those places. I've never gone in for a massage and then all of a sudden things happen. No, you have to search this out. And I definitely consider that cheating on every level. And he said he had gone a handful of times since our baby died. And I believe he had gone before I don't know if that's true. I think one time is enough to be not okay. And I asked him to leave that day, and he packed up and left. And he was acting exactly like when I found the porn on his phone, but I had about this much pity for him, which was basically none. And I was numb. I didn't want to hear his sorries. I didn't want to hear any excuse. And the one phrase that I'll never forget is, he asked, "Why didn't the Holy Spirit stop me?" It's like, wow, God gives us a free will, and He gives us this life to learn to fight our selfishness. And if we're going to put the blame on God, then there's a huge problem with your theology. So he ended up leaving. There was no issue there. I guess I don't know what I've done if he didn't leave. I probably would have just gone to my parents with the kids. I think he was scared and didn't know what to do. He went to his parents for the night, and then the next day I was supposed to help out with a farmer's market that his mom had a booth, and they had a huge garden, which is another thing I loved about it. Was the family was, all the animals in the garden, and I loved to come help with that. And I had experience in the past with running a farmer's market for an organic orchard out in Royal City, Washington. And it's where I've always felt my best and most comfortable. But that day, I was not about to go to a farmer's market. I had kicked my husband out of the house. This was life-altering chaos. I remember weeks earlier, we had been listening to a song called Love Triangle from, I can't remember her name, Raylan. She's a country singer. And it's about a mom and dad that divorce, and the poor little child is caught between. And she was so precocious for a 5-year-old. I mean, she would ask adult level questions, just, "Mommy, what does this mean?" Or "Mama, sorry, what does this mean?" And she's like asking about divorce, and I told her she didn't have to worry about that because I would never. And I had to bite my tongue. And she did bring up that conversation later down the road. And I didn't realize how much pride I had before all of this, and not even realizing it was pride until later. I remember that Saturday that at the farmer's market, I didn't show up. It was not on my mind at all. And his mom texted me, and she's like, "Sweetheart, are you going to show up today?" And I was like, "Did your son spend the night with you?" She's like, "Yeah." So I kind of figured she would know, our marriage was on the rocks, that I didn't know how my life as I knew it was going to be going forward. And at that point, I realized, as close as you can be to someone, 99.9% of the time they will side with their family. The whole blood is thicker than water, which I don't buy into that anymore. There can be bad people in family that you just need to cut off, and I am more than happy to do that anymore, especially after dealing with everything. So it kind of dawned on me that, she had helped Matt Dolan when the sister came forward. She had warned him, given him his bearings, rather than letting the sheriff have the element of surprise. And maybe the investigation would have actually gone somewhere where it ended up basically stopped dead in its tracks. Because at this point, it's more of a he said, she said. And I just knew she wasn't going to be an ally, even though she had been a friend, at least I thought. And I kind of started detaching myself from that family at that point. And let's see, that day, actually, I believe it was the night that I kicked him out, it went through my head how he had talked about the Asian massage parlors as inappropriate touching, and it just kind of clicked. Like, that's exactly what he said happened with him and his sister. And if you ask me, even going to a massage parlor, that is really, really downplaying how you would call that interaction. Like, I would call that infidelity, cheating, a lot more things than just inappropriate touching. So I ended up messaging the sister that he said he had inappropriately touched, and I just said, I didn't tell her what I knew, I didn't tell her what he said, I just asked her to please, can you share in your own words what happened to you as a child? And I didn't even know what was going to come of it. I just knew I needed to hear from her. I wish I had asked her the very first day that he told me, but hindsight's 2020. So I ended up deciding that I didn't want to stay in the marriage. There had been a huge porn addiction that he had covered up. There was the Asian massage parlors. There was the deal with his sister that was kind of vague, and his brother as well. And there are just so many cracks into this whole brick wall that was just a facade, and it was all just crumbling down. And I actually hadn't really decided. I just knew I didn't ever want him in my home again. And he texted me and said, do you want a divorce? And I said, yes. I was like, that's what I'm looking for. And so that was in the process. I had met with a lawyer. I had started paperwork. And then, I had let him take all 3 girls who were, at that point, between the ages of 3 and 6. So itty bitties. And I let him take them to his mom and dad's house for a little overnight trip. I let them go to see a movie. I was all about let's co-parent as best as we can. I do believe kids need a mom and dad, but they need a healthy mom and dad. And then, about 2 weeks later, I got an email from his sister. And I will never forget opening that up. I wasn't expecting it to be nearly as bad as it was. He was much older than the sister when it began. She was very young, basically about the age of some of my girls. And it did not stop when he was 15. It stopped when he was about 22. It was not just touching, it was full-on assault to the very worst degree. Every way imaginable. And she said she felt sick talking about it, and I understood. And also that he was not the only brother that assaulted her. There was 2 other brothers. It was Matt, my ex-husband Luke, and then their other brother, one of their other brothers, Ben. And I was just sick. I don't think I've ever actually vomited, but I was so close. And I felt like everything I knew, everything I thought I knew about this family, about my ex-husband, was just so far gone from what I originally thought. I had my own preconceived ideas of this family, my life, and at that point, I knew at that point that my girls were not going to be seeing their daddy anytime soon. I didn't know when. I didn't know even my legal abilities at this point. I just knew that I didn't want anything like that to ever happen. And if he was capable of doing that to his sister, what would stop him from doing that to my 3 girls? And they were right at the age when it started. And I remember I tried to talk to the lawyer that I had hired, and she was very evasive. And I think it went from just, this normal divorce case to maybe more than she bargained for. It was way more than I bargained for. And I just felt like she wasn't going to be the right fit. And I went. It was a Friday evening, so most lawyers were gone at 5 o'clock. I was searching through everywhere I could find to look for a family law attorney. I ended up getting a hold of one person, told her, a little bit of my story. She's like, I know who you need. She's like, I can't help you. That's not really my niche, but I have an excellent attorney. He's a bulldog. I was like, okay. She gave me his name, and it was well after 5 o'clock at this point. As I said, on a Friday, and he answered like the first ring, and he is very blunt, to the point. Probably not going to be your best buddy, but he will fight for you. And he was a godsend, and he really helped me figure out what to do, what I needed to do, and how to go about it. And we filed the paperwork and put all the, offenses that he had committed against his sister into the divorce paperwork. And I also had text messages from him where he admitted to things, and then he would respond in a way that wasn't denial, and it was kind of admittance by not saying, no, I didn't do that. Because if I ever got a text, someone said, why did you do this to your sister? I wouldn't just kind of circle it or explain it, or, I'd be like, what the heck are you talking about? I would never. And there was plenty of that. And I fully expected him not to just go along with it, because why would you? Even if you did, why would you admit to that with jail or whatever looming? But I didn't have any prior experience with attorneys, with the legal system, and I don't think he did either. And we were gonna go and have our first divorce hearing sometime in February, and so we separated in July. By that October, I think it was around Thanksgiving, fall time, he just said he would sign everything, and he signed all the paperwork, which, if I had done what he did, I would never ever, or if I hadn't done any of those things, there's no way in hell I would write my name under all those awful things. And what I had agreed to was supervised visitation, and so he agreed to doing that as well. Just a couple hours a month in a supervised facility. And so he agreed to all that, and then the divorce was finalized. I believe it was New Year's Day, which is kind of ironic how we met on a New Year's party and then our divorce was final on a New Year. Hadn't actually even thought about that till today. And then it was probably 4 or 5 days later after the final, he's like, I met somebody. I'm like, good for you. Does she know about you? And, oh yeah, he said, we talked about everything. We're so honest, blah, blah, blah. And, if I had known half of what I found out before I got married, there's no way I would have married him. I would have ever had a child with him. I am so thankful that I have my children, though. And they gave me the strength to do what I had to do at that time. So all that aside, I felt obligated to talk to her and tell her everything I knew. I figured any sane person hearing that would maybe back off, especially a newer relationship. But I sent her the sister's letter so she'd know it's not just me making stuff up. And he's agreed to all this stuff. And she said, oh yes, he told me everything. And I was kind of blown away at that point. And I guess not super surprised that there's women out there that will take on someone. I think there's probably a lot of similar feelings that I had going into the marriage of insecurity, maybe self-esteem issues, self-worth problems. And so you go for the guy that maybe is not ideal. And especially if you've done something like that. She had a son, and I was concerned for his well-being, and she was not. So at that point, I just kind of called it a wash, a lost cause. And as far as not being surprised, there was also when I got the letter from the sister, it mentioned Matt Dolan and Ben Dolan, which we were pretty close to, I would say. Not only physically, like proximity wise, but we would go over there, I would say 1 to 2 times per week to either of their homes, and we would do, Monday night football, and my girls would do sleepovers, and I mean, the cousins were practically sisters, and I love that for my kids. It was what I wanted, and I was wanting it so much that I didn't see any of the problems until, thankfully, it wasn't too late. When I received the letter from the sister who had been abused, and seeing that it had brought up the other 2 brothers, Matt Dolan as well as Ben Dolan, I felt that it wasn't just my information to hold on to. And I sought counseling from my pastor at the time, Jared Horton, who's the pastor at Real Life in Newport. I believe it's Real Life Selkirk now. And he agreed with me that it was probably the right thing to do to have their wives see what had been written about them by their sister. And I remember going over with a very heavy heart and feeling like my heart was in my stomach and I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. I didn't expect it to go well. And I met both of them. They were at the one sister's house because they're always together, and I just handed them the letter. I didn't really have any words. I didn't know how they were going to take it. I didn't know much, and just let them read for themselves. And they were obviously upset, and they ended up talking to their husbands, and they ended up coming home, so I figured that was my time to leave. And later that evening, the sister said one of the brothers had apologized to her, and I thought that was good, but I was still wondering, did they fully admit any responsibility? So I asked, what exactly did they apologize for? And she said, well, he just apologized for hurting me. And I had later conversations through text with Ben's wife, and she would only admit that her husband had inappropriately touched her and that it didn't go beyond that. And it was pretty clearly explicit to me that it was beyond that, and I sided with that version of the story, the truth. And her last words to me are, what my husband says happened is the truth. And so I knew at that point that there wouldn't and couldn't be any kind of further relationship with that side of the family, and knew it was time to cut it off. So I think I'll end it there for now. This is probably way too long. There's so much more I could go into, details. If you have a similar story, or you have red flags, gut feeling, just want to talk to somebody, I'm a great listener. I would love to talk to you. I'm more than happy to message or chat or whatever. And if you're still here, thanks for listening. Talk to you later. Bye.